Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We've got some pretty interesting news out of the state of Minnesota for you this evening. You'll remember that Congressman Keith Ellison has been accused of physical abuse by his former girlfriend, a woman called Karen Monahan. Monahan says that in the middle of a domestic argument, Congressman Ellison grabbed her by the legs and dragged her off the bed while screaming obscenities at her. She said this happened just 2 years ago in 2016. We can't say whether Karen Monahan's story is correct. Of course, we weren't there. We do know, though, that these are serious allegations and they're specific and recent, and they're made against a powerful man. Ellison is, of course, a sitting member of Congress. He's also the deputy head of the DNC. He's a candidate for Attorney General in Minnesota. Under pressure from critics, the state Democratic Party pledged to investigate Monahan's story. Tonight, we have their conclusions. Quote, an allegation standing alone is not necessarily sufficient to conclude that conduct occurred. That's the finding of the top lawyer for the Minnesota Democratic Party. In other words, Karen Monahan's words don't mean anything. Unless she provides tangible proof, we don't believe her. Let that sink in for a minute in light of all you've seen over the past 2 weeks. This is the standard Democratic Party politicians use to judge their own when they're accused of abuse, at least when political power is at stake. Prove it, honey. Otherwise, shut up and go away. Meanwhile, in Washington tonight, Brett Kavanaugh faces a very different standard. A little more than a week ago, a woman named Julie Swetnick told a remarkable story. Swetnick claimed that as a college student during the early 1980s, she attended at least 10 parties outside Washington where high school boys took turns raping underage girls who had been rendered semi-conscious with drugged punch. The gang rapes, she says, took place in the open. Swetnick says she saw them, but she never told friends, and she never filed a police report. She kept attending these rape parties until she herself was gang raped. According to Julie Swetnick, Brett Kavanaugh attended these parties. She saw him standing in line, she says, waiting his turn for rape. Here's how Swetnick described the scene in an interview with NBC News just tonight.
My body was violated. My soul was broken. I was at a party, and I remember that I started not to feel very well. And next thing I know, I was shoved into a room, and I'm having my clothes torn in different directions. I was physically assaulted in every way you could possibly physically assault a woman.
Everyone is wondering if one of those people was Brett Kavanaugh.
I cannot specifically say that he was one of the ones who assaulted me, but before this happened to me at that party, I saw Brett Kavanaugh there, I saw Mark Judge there, and they were hanging about the area where I started to feel disoriented and laughing. I could hear them laughing and laughing. If Brett Kavanaugh was one of those people that did this to me, there is no way in the world that he should go scot-free on this and that he should be on the Supreme Court.
If he was one of those people, a claim she's not actually making. Judged on its own terms, on the things that she is saying, Swetnick's story raises more questions than it answered. For example, why did she keep going to rape parties 10 in a row? Where are the witnesses to all of this? Dozens of people must have seen these atrocities, and they are atrocities. And yet not a single person has admitted even hearing about any of this. That's hard to understand, given the close-knit community of Catholic schools that produced Brett Kavanaugh. Swetnick has provided no evidence of any kind to show this happened. Reporters have interviewed many of her classmates, and nobody recalls it. The whole thing is hard to believe, and many questions need to be answered before it can be taken seriously. And yet Chuck Schumer hasn't asked those questions. He heard Swetnick's claims and immediately called for Brett Kavanaugh to drop out of the running. Professional charlatan Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut agreed with that. He called Swetnick's allegations, quote, a gut punch. Quote, if my Republican colleagues have any sense of morality, they will refuse to move forward with Judge Kavanaugh's nomination. Now, Democrats are demanding that the FBI investigate Swetnick's story. So far, that is not happening. Why is it not happening? Maybe here's part of the answer. This is NBC's Megyn Kelly. Watch her explain.
She faced allegations of her own misconduct during a stint at a Portland company 18 years ago. That company claims she told them she graduated from Johns Hopkins, but they learned the school had no record of her. She also falsely described her work experience at a prior employer. They said she engaged in unwelcome sexually offensive conduct herself. They said she made false and retaliatory allegations against her coworkers, that they had been inappropriate with her. They said she took medical leave and simultaneously claimed unemployment benefits. At the same time in D.C., there was a restraining order filed against her by an ex-boyfriend. So the people who are very upset that the FBI is not looking into Julie Swetnick's allegations, there are reasons for that.
Avenatti's been begging for the FBI.
What a shock.
Come. So I don't,
He's been begging for TV cameras.
He has been begging for TV
I don't think that.
Takes a lot of guts to say that on NBC. So if you are sincerely concerned about rape victims, and there are rape victims, a lot of them, you would hesitate before repeating Julie Swetnick's claims uncritically. That would discredit legitimate victims. Democrats don't care. It could work politically, and that's the only point. More than 2 weeks into the Brett Kavanaugh saga, only Senate Republicans still believe this story has anything to do with sexual abuse. Last Friday, Democrats said they needed a few days for some additional FBI interviews to follow up on Christine Ford's claims. Quote, "Let's give this 1 week," said Senator Amy Klobuchar. Her fellow Democrats nodded solemnly. Poor Jeff Flake believed them. Today, and you won't be surprised to know this, Democrats are screaming that a week is not enough. The FBI will need a lot more time, who knows how much time, to interview everyone who has ever made a claim against Brett Kavanaugh, including Julie Swetnick, maybe the editors of the Georgetown Prep yearbook, too. Just a week, they're telling us. That's a cover-up. Jeff Flake may fall for this again. Everybody else knows exactly what's going on. It's not about Brett Kavanaugh at this point. It's about punishing everyone who looks like Brett Kavanaugh. Watch this.
That Kavanaugh performance, that as a man, I was embarrassed for him. It was the ultimate display of white entitlement. And speaking of which, just one more point. As I talk to men over the weekend, I find that the higher you go on the income curve, the more men are like, why, well, we all did this in one form or another, still not getting it. Women are getting it, and I find the lower you go on the income curve, men are getting it.
Donnie Deutsch has been talking to people. Now, if you're Deutsch's shrink, you might understand what he just said. But if you're not, you might wonder what in the world this story, the Kavanaugh story, has to do with race. Seemingly nothing. Everyone in it is the same color. But you'd be too literal if you concluded that. You'd be missing the point. Democrats aren't looking for justice here. They want a revolution. For 60 years, they have been telling us that it is immoral to judge people by their skin color. And they were right about that. Absolutely right. They put up a monument to Martin Luther King on the National Mall just in case we forgot. And yet suddenly, without notifying the rest of us, they have changed the rules. Anyone who doesn't judge others on the basis of skin color is, wait for it now, a bigot. Refuse to commit racism? You're a racist. Is your head spinning yet? It's just starting. Wait till you see this. Here's Saturday Night Live's treatment of Senator Lindsey Graham over the weekend. Now, a month ago, Graham was one of the very few Republicans liberals could stomach. And then he stood up for Brett Kavanaugh. Now he's a monster, a very specific kind of monster. Watch this.
You give him a damn robe and you let him do whatever the hell he wants. Because this right now, this is my audition for Mr. Trump's cabinet. And also for a regional production of The Crucible. And let me tell you, Queen, I was good.
Let me tell you, Queen. Get it? Lindsey Graham is secretly gay. That's what NBC is telling you. And they're implying there's something wrong with that Graham ought to be deeply ashamed of that and mocked for it. But wait a second. When did liberals start using gay as an epithet? Isn't that against everything they supposedly believe? Only if you assume they believe anything. But they don't. It's only about power, whatever it takes. Tammy Bruce is a radio host and president of Independent Women's Voice, and she joins us tonight. Tammy, I have to say, I'm getting used to the idea that if you argue against judging people on the basis of skin color, you're racist, okay? That's Orwellian,
sure.
but I hear it all the time.
Sure.
But now the left, guardians of America's gay community, are using gay slurs against Lindsey Graham? Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, regardless of what you think of Mr. Graham, whether you agree with his policies or not, what's fascinating is the left does this all the time. When they don't like somebody, they want to smear someone, that is the accusation to some degree, is that you're supposed to believe that somebody's a monster and as a result they're gay. Now, this is where...
from the left?
Well, of course. My first book in 2001 was about how homophobia, sexism, racism lives on the left. All the finger pointing on the right is projection. The fact is, and you've seen this when it comes to the impact on women these last few weeks, they don't care about women. Women are to be used. They don't care about gay people. Gay people are to be used. And on the same issue with race, if it can get them something, that's what they then will say. But every now and then the curtain gets drawn back, and this is one of those times. You're seeing this all wrapped up. The panic clearly is visceral, and what they really think is coming out. Now, whether or not their constituencies, who they think they're their constituencies, will put up with it is the issue. Will there be a pushback on effectively, clearly, the mocking of someone or the attempt to paint someone with the scarlet letter of G?
But how could how could, honestly, and I don't want to single anybody out, but if you're the Human Rights Campaign and you exist to call out and punish this kind of behavior, and they do, how can you sit and not say anything when this happens?
Well, we're going to watch that, aren't we? I think that what happens on the left is everybody gets trained that the ends justifies the means, right? That what it is, it's the end result. So no matter what we've got to do, you've got to be able to deal with it, because in the end, we really mean the best for you. It's very much like a battered woman or a battered man. Is your batterer says, look, I'm doing this for your own good. Even though it hurts you, in the end, I know what's best. That's what the left has always been saying to Americans. And look at the end result. The end result, of course, is economic decline. The end result is a decline in the quality of our lives, and certainly not being taken seriously for who we are as individuals, whether it's about being women or being a person of color. And then, of course, denigrating everyone else in every other category, like people who are white or who just don't fit within the framework of who the protected classes are for the left.
I'm learning more about the left than I ever wanted to know, and I'm glad I didn't read your book in 2001, because I would have been upset this whole time.
These last 2 weeks have been shameful. They've been an insult to every single American, all of us who rely on decency, treating people fairly, expecting America to stand up for her ideals, and the very people who say they're the banner carriers of that are the ones carrying the torch and burning it to the ground.
Just the opposite. Amazing. Tammy Bruce, thank you for that.
Thank you.